Being a single dad is a life unlike any other. It comes with a weight, a responsibility, and a set of challenges that most people can't fully appreciate until they've been there. Imagine waking up every morning not just for yourself, but for two little humans who depend on you completely. Your day starts before the sun rises, with the soft but insistent cries of a child who hasn't yet learned how to sleep through the night, or the quiet shuffle of tiny feet as they sneak out of their rooms. You get up, even if you're tired, even if your body aches from the day before, because they need breakfast, they need a clean shirt, they need your presence. And that presence has to be steady, calm, reassuring, because kids can sense when you're worried or overwhelmed, and they feed off it whether you realize it or not. Being a single dad also means learning to be everything at once. You have to be the nurturer, the disciplinarian, the teacher, the cook, the cleaner, the chauffeur, and sometimes even the therapist. There's no handbook, no instructions handed out when the partner disappears from the equation. Every day is a new puzzle, a test of patience and creativity. You figure out how to make pancakes while checking homework, how to soothe a skinned knee while negotiating a conflict between siblings, how to juggle work deadlines with the constant interruptions of parenting. There's no room for excuses, no days off, no escape from the constant demand for attention and care. And even though it's exhausting, and sometimes it feels like the world is quietly judging you for not having a traditional family setup, you do it because someone has to. Financial pressure adds another layer. Being a single parent often means living paycheck to paycheck. You can't just take a day off, because that might mean missing rent or falling behind on bills. Every purchase is weighed, every decision calculated, because the budget is tight and mistakes can have real consequences. You start becoming a master of trade-offs. You learn to stretch groceries, repair clothes instead of replacing them, find creative ways to entertain and educate the kids without spending money. There's a constant mental load that comes with managing not just your own life, but the lives of others, balancing short-term needs with long-term goals. And yet, even in the middle of all this pressure, there's hope. You wake up every day imagining a better future for your children, imagining a life where you're not just surviving, but thriving. Being a single dad also reshapes your sense of time and priorities. You're not measuring life by the hours you work or the social events you attend, but by milestones. A child's first day at school, their first soccer goal, the moment they finally read a book on their own. Every small victory feels enormous, because you know how much effort it took just to get to that point. There's a deep, unspoken pride in watching them grow, a sense of accomplishment that comes from knowing that, despite everything stacked against you, you've managed to provide stability and love. And yet, there's always this tension. You want to be there for everything, but life doesn't pause. Work still demands your attention. Bills still pile up. And somewhere deep down, you carry the longing for support, for someone to share the load, for the reassurance that you're not doing it alone. And then there's the emotional side, the internal struggle that often goes unseen. Single parenthood is lonely in ways people don't talk about. The nights are long and quiet after the kids finally fall asleep, and the house feels too big, too empty. You question your choices, worry about whether you're doing enough, whether you're teaching the right lessons, whether the sacrifices you make today will truly pay off tomorrow. You carry the weight of responsibility like an invisible backpack, always strapped on, never lightened. But there's also a kind of resilience that develops, a toughness forged in fire. You learn to adapt, to improvise, to find joy in small moments, a shared laugh over a spilled bowl of cereal, a bedtime story read by flashlight because the power went out, a simple hug after a long day. These moments become the anchors, the reminders of why you keep going, why the exhaustion is worth it, why the struggle has meaning. This life shapes you in profound ways. You learn patience, empathy, and endurance on a level most people never reach. You understand the importance of time, the fragility of happiness, the power of persistence. Every decision you make is filtered through the lens of responsibility, of love, of sacrifice. And though it's hard and messy and sometimes heartbreaking, there's also a richness, a depth, a beauty to being a single dad. a life lived not just for yourself, but for someone else entirely, someone who looks at you with trust and expectation every single day, and in return, gives you a reason to keep pushing forward no matter what comes next. He had been waiting for this interview for weeks, maybe even months, and it felt like everything in his life had led to this one moment. It wasn't just any job. It was an opportunity that could shift the entire trajectory of his life. He had prepared meticulously, going over potential questions, researching the company inside and out, and rehearsing answers until they felt natural. Every detail mattered. The crispness of his shirt, the shine on his shoes, the quiet confidence in his handshake. He knew this could be a turning point, the chance to provide more security for his children, to finally feel like he was stepping into a world that had always seemed just out of reach. The night before, sleep had been elusive. His mind kept running through the scenarios, imagining the questions the interviewer might ask, the way he would present his skills, the impression he needed to leave. There was nervous energy coiled tight in his chest, a mix of excitement and fear, the kind that makes your stomach flutter and your hands tremble slightly when you reach for your coffee cup. He had gone over every possible scenario, every possible mistake he could make, and promised himself he would rise above them. He couldn't afford to fail. Not this time. Not when he had already carried so much responsibility alone, balancing the lives of his children with the demands of his work and the endless list of daily challenges. The morning arrived, and he moved with a precision born of necessity. Breakfast had to be made, lunches packed, kids dressed, and all without losing sight of the time. The clock ticked loudly in the background, a reminder that punctuality could make or break this chance. He double-checked his notes, glanced at his reflection in the mirror, and took a deep breath to steady the nerves. There was a rush of adrenaline as he stepped outside, the city already buzzing with the early morning commute, cars honking, people moving with purpose. Every step toward the bus stop or the subway felt like a step closer to destiny, yet also heavier with the weight of expectation. On the way, the streets were alive with ordinary life. People rushing to jobs that may not have meant much to them, errands being run, the quiet routines of strangers intersecting briefly with his own path. And yet, amidst the ordinary, there was a sense of urgency for him that was deeply personal. Each light he waited at, each corner he turned, felt charged with significance. He rehearsed the answers to questions in his mind, reminding himself of his strengths, his achievements, the resilience he had built over years of hard work and sacrifice. He visualized walking into the office with confidence, sitting across from the panel of interviewers, articulating his experience and vision with clarity and authority. But the day, like life itself, has a way of testing intentions. Just as he was about to arrive, something happened, a minor accident on the sidewalk, a person in distress, a situation that demanded immediate attention. He glanced at his watch, saw the minutes slipping away, and felt a jolt of panic. This interview was supposed to be a step forward, a lifeline, a validation of all the effort he had poured into his life. Missing it felt unthinkable, yet his eyes fell on the person who clearly needed help, and a different kind of instinct kicked in. His values, his sense of responsibility, the lessons he had taught his children about compassion and integrity, all collided in that moment. Even as he hesitated, thinking of the consequences, he realized that this was one of those rare, defining moments. Life doesn't always give you a chance to act rightly, while also protecting your own interests. Sometimes you have to choose. And he made the choice, even though it meant risking the opportunity he had worked so hard to secure. He put down his briefcase, approached the person, and offered assistance, his heart racing with a mixture of anxiety and purpose. Every second felt amplified, every passing minute a reminder that his future might be slipping through his fingers, yet there was no turning back. He could feel the tension mounting, the awareness that time was slipping by, that the office, the interview, the chance to finally break through, was fading with every act of kindness he performed. He thought about the sacrifices he had made to get to this point, the long nights, the skipped meals, the moments when he had pushed himself to exhaustion for the sake of his children's future. And yet, Even with all that weighing on him, he felt an odd clarity. The decision to help, to prioritize humanity over ambition in that precise moment, was not a weakness. It was, in some way, a testament to the person he had become, a man capable of great responsibility, not just to himself, but to the world around him. As he finally finished, dusted himself off, and glanced at his watch again, the reality hit him hard. He had missed the interview. The one chance he had been counting on, the opportunity that seemed like a bridge to a better life, was gone. Panic threatened to rise. Frustration simmered just beneath the surface, and self-doubt crept in, whispering questions he wasn't sure he could answer. Had he made a terrible mistake? Was the choice to act on impulse, to help a stranger, going to cost him everything he had been striving for? As he approached the corner, he saw her, a woman standing on the curb, clearly in distress, waving frantically at passing cars. At first, he thought she might just need directions, or perhaps had missed a ride. But as he got closer, he noticed the way her hands trembled, the panic in her eyes, and the way she kept glancing behind her as if something urgent was chasing her. There was no mistaking it. She needed help, and she needed it now. Most people would have kept walking, assuming someone else would step in, or perhaps pretending not to notice. But he couldn't. His own life had been shaped by the kindness of strangers in small, pivotal moments, and he knew the weight of looking away when someone was clearly in trouble. He slowed his pace, carefully assessing the situation. The woman's car was parked awkwardly, hazard lights blinking, engine ticking as it cooled, and she seemed flustered and overwhelmed. Papers were scattered around her feet, one of them fluttering dangerously close to the street. She looked like she had been trying to fix something and failed, or perhaps had been stranded for a while and had grown desperate in the process. Her expensive-looking handbag was clutched tightly to her side, but it did nothing to hide the panic in her face. In that moment, he realized that she wasn't just struggling with a minor inconvenience. She was someone whose situation could spiral if she didn't receive help quickly. He called out to her, his voice steady but kind. "Do you need some help?" She hesitated for a moment, scanning the street as if expecting someone else to step in, before finally nodding. Relief washed over her face in a way that made him pause for just a second. It wasn't just gratitude. It was a quiet acknowledgement that, in this moment, he had chosen to act when others might not have. He moved closer, offering a reassuring smile, and started helping her gather the papers that had fallen to the ground. They were documents, folders, something clearly important, and she muttered thanks through hurried words. Her accent suggested she wasn't local, which made him think she might have been traveling, caught in a city she didn't fully know. As they worked together, he realized that this wasn't going to be a quick fix. The car seemed to have a mechanical problem, something beyond his expertise, and she was clearly flustered by the ticking clock. He could feel the tension radiating off her, the pressure she was under to get somewhere, to accomplish something. There was no choice but to stay, to do what he could. He opened the trunk, found some tools, offered to make a call on her behalf, anything to ease her panic. Each small action was a deliberate choice, a decision to put her immediate need above the pressing urgency of his own day. He could feel time slipping, hear the faint echo of his own anxiety in the back of his mind, reminding him that his own priorities, the job interview, the chance of a lifetime, were still waiting. But something about the way she looked at him, with a mixture of desperation and trust, made him realize that life sometimes asks us to make hard choices. Helping someone in need isn't always convenient. It isn't scheduled, and it isn't polite or predictable. It's messy, it's sudden, and it can come at the exact moment when your own ambitions are screaming for attention. Yet, there was no hesitation. His hands moved instinctively. His voice remained calm, his presence steady. He didn't know her, and she didn't know him, but for a brief moment, that didn't matter. The human connection was immediate, visceral, and undeniable. They managed to stabilize the situation enough to keep the car safe and the papers intact. She exhaled deeply, her shoulders finally relaxing after what had seemed like a lifetime of tension compressed into a few frantic minutes. Her gratitude was palpable, expressed in words, gestures, and even in the small, relieved smile that finally broke through her worried expression. For him, there was a quiet satisfaction in having done the right thing, even if it meant sacrificing his own schedule. He felt the familiar pull of moral responsibility, that inner voice that reminded him that kindness, even when inconvenient, carries its own reward. As they finished, she asked questions, hesitant, curious, appreciative, and he answered with what little knowledge he had. The conversation was brief but meaningful, an exchange between strangers bound together by circumstance and action. He could sense her urgency returning, a reminder that their encounter was temporary, that life was still pressing forward. Yet in that moment, there was a bridge built by shared effort and human empathy, a silent acknowledgement that what had just happened mattered. He could feel the weight of choice lingering in his chest, the awareness that stopping to help someone, truly help them, required him to step off the straight path he had carefully charted, to risk missing something he had been chasing for weeks. Every second stretched as he assessed what to do next. He knew that staying longer might mean missing the opportunity he had been preparing for. The pressure mounted, the reality of the day tugged at him, yet he couldn't undo what he had already started. His hands were dirty from the effort, his watch showed the passing minutes, and still, he remained, focused on the person before him. And in that focus, in that act of selfless attention, something profound began to unfold. Not in words, not in gestures, but in the quiet energy of two lives intersecting at the right, impossible moment. Choosing kindness over personal gain is one of those moments that seems simple in theory, but feels almost impossible in practice. He had been walking down the street, briefcase in hand, rehearsing every line of his interview, mentally picturing the room, the panel of decision-makers, the questions he would answer with calm confidence. He had spent nights preparing, weeks organizing his thoughts, and months imagining the impact this opportunity could have on his life and the lives of his children. This was supposed to be the day everything changed, the day the doors opened that had long seemed locked, the day when effort, persistence, and sacrifice would finally pay off. And yet, here he was, confronted by a stranger whose need was immediate, urgent, and undeniable. There was an instinctive pause, a quick calculation in his mind of what it would mean to stop, what it would mean to help, versus what it would mean to continue on schedule, toward his own goal. Most people might have kept walking. Most people would have told themselves that it wasn't their problem, that the cost was too high, that there would be other interviews, other chances, other days. But for him, hesitation was brief, almost non-existent. There was something about the urgency in her eyes, the small but steady desperation in her gestures, that made the choice almost instinctual. Kindness, in that moment, outweighed ambition. Compassion outweighed convenience. He knelt to help her pick up the scattered papers, steadying them as the wind threatened to carry them across the street. He offered calm words as she muttered hurried thanks, trying to manage both her fear and her frustration. Every instinct screamed at him to glance at his watch, to consider the time, to weigh the impact of this delay. He could feel the clock ticking relentlessly in his mind, each second a reminder that he was moving farther from his interview, that his carefully plotted path was slipping away. Yet even as he recognized the cost, he stayed, guided by a moral compass that refused to allow him to abandon someone in need. This was more than a small gesture. It required him to put his priorities aside, to acknowledge that life doesn't always allow for perfect timing, and that true character is often revealed not in moments of convenience, but in moments of sacrifice. He could have rationalized walking on, telling himself that this was an isolated incident, that someone else would help, that his life was already full of struggle and that he could not afford the delay. But deep down, he knew that kindness isn't optional when you are capable of it. It's not something to be measured against personal benefit or convenience. It is a responsibility, a choice, and sometimes the hardest choice you will ever make. While he assisted her, he realized that these moments are rare in life. There are opportunities to help, sure, but few demand immediate action. Few require you to risk your own ambitions in the process. The stranger had no way of knowing that he had a crucial interview, No way of knowing that his schedule was packed. No way of knowing how much was riding on his punctuality. And yet, he acted anyway. He placed her needs above his own, not out of obligation, but out of empathy, out of a recognition that some actions carry intrinsic value beyond measurable success. In that choice, he was reminded of lessons he had long taught his children, that integrity is measured not by what you achieve when convenient, but by what you do when it's difficult, inconvenient, and risky. The wind blew harder, scattering a few more papers, and he moved quickly to secure them, aware of the passerby who barely glanced at the scene, oblivious to the drama unfolding on the corner. He could feel his own pulse quickening, a mix of adrenaline, anxiety, and an unshakable awareness of the trade-off he was making. Every second spent helping her was a second lost from his interview preparation, a second edging him closer to being late, a second that could cost him a chance he had been dreaming of for months. And yet, there was no hesitation in his movements, no doubt in his hands. He steadied the car door, helped her pick up what had fallen, and even offered suggestions for a temporary solution. Each action was deliberate, focused, and unselfish, reflecting a priority system that placed human connection above personal gain. In that moment, he understood something essential. The true measure of success isn't always tied to achievement, money, or recognition. Sometimes it's about the choice to do what is right even when it costs you, even when the stakes are high, even when the world expects you to act selfishly. It's about having the courage to pause, to step off your carefully charted course, and act in a way that benefits someone else without guarantee, without expectation, without immediate reward. He could feel the weight of the decision in his chest, a tension between what he wanted and what he knew was right. And as he stayed, helping the stranger, he felt a quiet, growing conviction that this choice, difficult and inconvenient as it was, mattered more than the interview waiting down the street. Every movement, every word, every careful gesture carried with it a significance that he could feel but couldn't yet measure. He had chosen to act selflessly in a world that often rewards the opposite, to place humanity above ambition, and in doing so, he was stepping into a version of himself that had been honed by struggle, resilience, and empathy. It was exhausting, it was stressful, and it was inconvenient, but it was also undeniably right. When she finally looked up at him, there was a moment of recognition in her eyes, the subtle shift that happens when you realize the person standing before you is more than they first appear. At first glance, she seemed like any other busy executive, a stranger whose life existed in a sphere far removed from his own. But the way she carried herself, the quiet confidence in her posture, the calm decisiveness even in the midst of her own crisis, it was impossible to ignore. Something told him that this was someone who had reached a level of success that most people could only dream of, someone whose decisions had weight, someone whose life was structured by ambition and accomplishment. And in that instant, he realized that this stranger, the one he had stopped to help, was not just anyone. She was extraordinary, and her world was one that intersected with opportunity in ways he had only imagined. She gathered her papers and straightened her jacket, brushing the dust off her sleeve, her eyes never leaving his. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady but tinged with relief, the kind of calm gratitude that comes from knowing someone has genuinely saved you from a stressful moment. It wasn't just polite, it was sincere, and it carried a weight that made him pause. She wasn't just thanking him for picking up papers or offering a helping hand. She was acknowledging that he had taken the time, the effort, and the risk to help someone who could not repay him in that moment. There was an unspoken understanding that actions like his, small yet deliberate, selfless yet decisive, revealed something fundamental about character. As they spoke, she mentioned her car troubles, the inconvenience, and the important meeting she had been rushing to. He listened, offering practical suggestions, helping her assess what could be done immediately to stabilize the situation. She seemed impressed by his calmness, the way he stayed composed under pressure, and the intuitive way he handled problems without hesitation. It was clear she had dealt with high-stakes situations before, but there was also something about the unassuming way he approached the problem that stood out. Most people would have panicked, called for help, or walked away, but he had acted decisively and with empathy. She noticed that. Then came the conversation that would shift everything. She asked his name, where he worked, what he did. His initial answers were straightforward, practical, honest. He didn't embellish or exaggerate. He described his work, his life, the responsibilities he carried, the kids he was raising, the opportunities he had been pursuing. She listened intently, nodding as he spoke, asking questions that showed genuine curiosity and engagement. There was no pretense, no superficial small talk. Instead, there was a quiet evaluation, the kind that comes from someone who has learned to recognize talent, determination, and integrity in the most unexpected places. As the conversation unfolded, she revealed more about herself. Her calm exterior belied the intensity of her own responsibilities. She was a CEO, managing not just a company, but the careers, livelihoods, and ambitions of countless people. Her time was tightly scheduled, her days structured down to the minute, and yet she had allowed herself to be interrupted by a stranger who had acted selflessly. That acknowledgement wasn't lost on him. He understood, in that moment, that his decision to stop and help had placed him in a position few others would have even imagined. By choosing compassion over convenience, he had crossed an invisible threshold into a world where opportunity and character intersected. She asked him about his aspirations, his goals, what he hoped to achieve if given the chance. He spoke honestly, sharing not just the ambitions that drove him professionally, but also the personal motivations that had shaped his life. His desire to provide stability for his children, to break cycles of struggle, to prove to himself and the world that his hard work mattered. There was a transparency in his words, a combination of vulnerability and strength that resonated with her. It was rare, she noted silently, to meet someone who balanced humility with ambition, responsibility with empathy. As they finished, she offered him a gesture that surprised him, a way to stay connected, a hint that this encounter was not just a fleeting moment, but a potential doorway into something bigger. She recognized that his actions, the choice to help, reflected qualities that could not be taught, could not be rehearsed, and that were invaluable in any context, whether personal or professional. Her recognition was immediate and profound. She saw potential, not just in skills or experience, but in character, judgment, and the capacity to act decisively under pressure. In that exchange, he began to sense the magnitude of what had happened. Not just a moment of human connection, but the first step in a chain of events that could alter the course of his life. The act of compassion, in that moment, became far more than a simple gesture. It became a turning point, a quiet pivot in a life that had been defined by struggle, effort, and unwavering responsibility. He had stopped to help a stranger on the street, driven not by expectation, not by reward, but by the instinctive recognition that someone needed assistance and that he could provide it. Every second spent kneeling to gather scattered papers, steadying a trembling hand, and offering calm guidance carried weight far beyond the immediate situation. In that instant, he had chosen humanity over ambition, empathy over urgency, and that choice, though small in appearance, planted seeds of opportunity that he could not yet see. As the CEO expressed her gratitude, her eyes reflecting a mixture of relief, respect, and admiration, he began to understand that acts of kindness are rarely lost, rarely unnoticed. There was a silent acknowledgement that transcended words, a recognition that his character, forged by years of sacrifice and resilience, had manifested in a moment of selfless action. She could see it in the steadiness of his hands, in the calm decisiveness of his voice, in the way he had assessed the situation and acted without hesitation. It was a display of integrity that could not be fabricated, rehearsed, or bought. It was authenticity in its purest form, and it spoke volumes about who he was as a person, as a parent, and as a professional. This realization dawned on him slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. The adrenaline of the moment began to fade, leaving space for reflection. The chaos of the morning, the scattered papers, the urgency of the car trouble, all of it seemed to crystallize into a clear understanding of the power of choice. He had faced a split-second decision, one that could have gone either way, and he had chosen to help. In doing so, he had demonstrated a rare quality, the ability to act rightly even when it comes at a personal cost. That ability, he began to recognize, was a trait that would ripple through every aspect of his life, influencing how others saw him and how he saw himself. The CEO, as they continued to converse, made it clear that she valued more than just competence or experience. She valued judgment, ethics, and the ability to act decisively with empathy. In her world, leadership was not measured solely by profit margins or quarterly results. It was measured by the capacity to make the right choices under pressure, to balance responsibility with humanity, to recognize opportunity in moments of moral significance. She had witnessed, in him, a living example of this balance, and it left a lasting impression. She saw not just a man who could solve problems, but a man who could lead, inspire, and navigate challenges with integrity and grace. He began to feel a shift within himself, a recognition that the smallest actions can carry monumental consequences. By prioritizing the immediate need of a stranger over his own pressing agenda, he had inadvertently opened doors that might have remained closed for years. The choice to act with compassion, to step into uncertainty rather than cling to self-interest, had transformed a fleeting moment into a catalyst for opportunity. It was a lesson in patience, in moral courage, and in the unexpected ways life rewards those who act from the heart rather than the mind alone. As they parted ways, he felt the subtle yet profound impact of the encounter settling in. The city around him continued its rush, indifferent to the brief intersection of two lives that had just occurred, yet he carried a renewed sense of possibility. The weight of the morning, the missed interview, the tension of timing, the uncertainty of consequences, began to feel lighter, reframed by the understanding that integrity and kindness create value in ways that are invisible at first glance. This moment, seemingly ordinary to anyone observing from afar, had become extraordinary because of the conscious choice he had made. He realized that life has a way of rewarding the unexpected, of elevating those who act selflessly even when it is inconvenient or risky. The encounter with the CEO was more than coincidence. It was the convergence of preparation, circumstance, and character. His preparedness for his own career, the resilience built from single parenthood, and the empathy cultivated through countless small acts of care all converged in this single, defining moment. In helping her, he had demonstrated the qualities that matter most in leadership, in trust, and in human connection. And as he walked away from the scene, a quiet sense of anticipation settled over him. The seeds planted by that act of compassion were already beginning to bear fruit in ways he could not yet measure. Opportunities, recognition, and new paths often emerge from moments when we choose others over ourselves, when we act with integrity in the face of urgency, when we demonstrate that character is as important as competence. He understood now that by putting kindness first, he had positioned himself not just for personal success, but for transformative possibilities that would ripple far beyond the morning's events.